Coming to you from Southern California, this is Mindset, mental health news and information. I'm your host, James Curtis. On today's show.
My name is Everett Jackson.
Michael Hatfield.
Bishard Oden, locked up for 15 years.
Dwayne Witherspoon.
Little Ernest Timothy Smithfield Sr.
James Hill L. I don't have an out date, so I'm scheduled to die here.
Michael 2X Tubbs.
Darryl Woods, sentenced to life without parole. We are the Youth Deterrent Program at the Detroit Reentry Center. We are here to transform the lives of our young people and give them a sense of identity and purpose.
Those are the voices of prison inmates, part of a project called Cared Straight, deliberately named to conjure up that well-known image of that other series and all of its offshoots, Scared Straight. But according to experts, there was a problem with the so-called Scared Straight approach, so much so that it's been dubbed by some experts as a quick fix panacea that didn't work. So today, we look at a more enlightened cousin, if you will, of that well-intentioned program called Cared Straight, and talk to a judge who so fully supports this new and improved effort that he and his fellow bench officers now refer the young people who come into the Detroit juvenile justice system directly to the program. But first, this news from the Mindset Report. The Mindset Report available online at mindsetreport.com. The Mindset Report, your most comprehensive online source for mental health news. Today's Mindset Report is underwritten by Responsibility, a complete guide to bystander intervention by Alan Berkowitz, who is committed to the idea that the solution to social justice problems requires that we engage as bystanders. Responsibility available online at lulu.com. Lulu spelled L-U-L-U. From NPR, pen and paper or laptop. Pam Mueller was a teaching assistant for an introductory to psychology class at UCLA. One day, she forgets to bring her laptop to class and decided to take notes the old-fashioned way with pen and paper. Well, she felt that she got so much more out of the lecture. Mueller approached her professor, Daniel Oppenheimer. The two of them decided to conduct an experiment to test the idea, and the results, of course, not even close. Test subjects who used pen and paper scored significantly higher than those who used laptops in terms of recollection and comprehension. Their findings are published in the journal Psychological Science. And from Psychology Today, children with autism benefit from being around animals, according to a series of research studies conducted by Purdue University's Marguerite O'Hare and her colleagues. The studies were based on the idea of having guinea pigs in the classroom. Children with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, showed improved social skills after interacting with guinea pigs. And in another study, they found that these same children talked, smiled, and laughed more. The newest in the series of studies, showed that playing with guinea pigs measurably reduced social stress for the children. For details on these and other stories about mental health, check out the Mindset Report online at mindsetreport.com. Back with today's topic, thinking mental health in juvenile court, in a moment.
Judge Frank Semansky, Judge.
Welcome back to Mindset, mental health news and information. I'm your host, James Curtis. In recognition of Mental Health Awareness Month, that is May, we're examining some of the perhaps less thought of mental health issues today, thinking of mental health in juvenile court, thinking mental health in the juvenile court setting. My guest, the Honorable Frank Semansky, he's a Detroit Superior Court judge in the Wayne County Juvenile Division. And a little background, according to some studies, there are more than 10 times the number of people with a mental illness in jails and prisons as are in mental hospitals. According to NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, while 20%, approximately 20% of state prisoners and 21% of local jail prisoners have a, quote, recent mental health history, have a recent history of mental health or a mental health condition, a full 70%, that's 70% of youth in juvenile justice systems have at least one mental health condition, and at least 20% of those live with a severe mental illness. So today, we look at one approach that addresses the mental health issues of juvenile offenders and the steps to keep them outside of the jail bars.
Judge Frank Semansky, Judge Frank from Detroit, Michigan, and I work in the juvenile division of the circuit court here in Detroit, Michigan. I'm also one of the founding experts of an organization called Creating Champions for Life. It is a organization of 31 experts in various fields dealing specifically with issues of family and personal development. So anything from parenting to grief issues that individuals can have, to personal growth. We have, just a number of people. We have a nutritional expert. We have a play expert. It pretty much runs the gamut, and it's basically a group of people that came together with a view towards providing advice to help others really get their lives on track, and not just get by, but to really thrive.
Wayne County is the county that Detroit's in. You're a judge there. You're in the juvenile division. What made you want to get on the bench?
Well, my father is, and I always love to talk about my dad because he was a phenomenal guy, and I tell people, and I'm Frank Jr. actually, but I always tell people my dad was the real Judge Frank, Semansky, and just a fabulous guy who was on the bench for 27 years and had the utmost respect of the people that practiced in his court, and set a great example for us, talked to us about public service, and was a real inspiration to me, and that was a big part of it. He and my mother, I can't talk about Dad without talking about Mom, two phenomenal people, and they've really fueled a lot of what I do or work to do when I'm working in the juvenile court, because they set a phenomenal example for myself, and there were 7 of us. There were 7 kids in our family, and we all went to college, and we all have successful careers, and 6 of us are married and happily married. So just a phenomenal example, and I think what we've been able to do is a reflection of what they did for us. So when I take the bench, I look at these young people that come from some challenged neighborhoods. We got some of the toughest zip codes in the country right here in Detroit, and I say to myself, these kids, they didn't have parents like I have. They got challenges. Some of them, have a one-parent home or not even a single functioning parent. And so I'm always looking for what can we do? What can I do to help bridge as best I can, and with the services that we have here, what can we do to bridge to make up for the fact that these kids have these challenges in their background?
Give us the overview for folks who may not be familiar with the differences between the juvenile court system and its mission with respect to rehabilitation and the adult penal system or court system.
I'm glad you asked me that, James, because this is really, it's the heart of why I love the work that I do so much here. Juvenile court is juvenile court because we recognize that kids are kids. I mean, they're still developing, and the brain research that I've done, and part of this, talked about in my book too. But the fact is, we now know you're not an adult at 18. You're not really even a full adult in terms of your brain development. I'm saying, of course, legally you're an adult at 18. I don't want to mislead anybody there. But even at 21, your prefrontal cortex, it really hasn't fully developed. Your command center that gives you the ability to really fully distinguish between, what are appropriate actions and what aren't, and to discipline yourself. That's not really fully online till now. We see your mid-20s. So for us to be treating a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old like an adult and just saying, okay, well, we're going to, assess this amount of punishment, and that's, what you're going to get, and you're going to have to learn from that. I mean, that's not a valid model to work with. So the philosophy of the juvenile court is geared towards rehabilitation, and of course, just knowing, and I love the fact that I'm on mindset here with you, James, because to me, life is really about our mindset. So, I love the fact that you've got this show in the first place to discuss this kind of issue, but our focus is on rehabilitation, because as much as we can say, when somebody comes to court on a juvenile delinquency case, which is, a young person committing a crime, a criminal act, it's one thing to say, what have you done? But then, not only do we recognize that they're not fully developed, but, another thing we have to look at, because we do the neglect and abuse cases, is, well, what's been done to you? A lot of these kids come in here and, they're victims of physical or sexual abuse at a very young age. And then, that plays out in a cycle. So we have to work to, we got to work to interrupt these cycles so that we don't just continue them and we can get people on track.
Give us a little bit of detail, Your Honor, about what happens to a young person who's under the age of 18. And let's take a typical scenario. Let's not talk about the more extreme, more violent sort of circumstances where a young person is likely or may be subject to being tried or treated like an adult. Let's talk about more of a, for lack of a better term, run-of-the-mill case where it's squarely within and completely within the purview of the juvenile court. How are these young people treated with respect to penalty, punishment, rehabilitation, say as compared to an adult counterpart who, say, breaks into a store or, steals something or gets into a fight where, nobody gets severely hurt, but still it rises to the level of being charged with a crime and being arrested? Right. So, and you're right. We have a lot of those kinds of cases. I had a case not too long ago. A kid, a group of kids, they broke into a gas station, and what did they take? They took pop and chips. I mean, yes. So what will we do? So if it's a first offense, we're gonna give that kid a chance to prove themselves on probation. All right, we're not going to necessarily. They might do a few days at a juvenile detention facility, but initially, at least, we're going to give them a chance to recognize that, hey, I made a mistake, and I can show the court that I can follow through with orders, and we're going to order them to participate with some counseling, because obviously, there's some issues with their values and their thinking process if they're doing these things in the first place. So we're going to have them do some counseling. There'll be some community service. And James, this goes back to mindset again. I love to talk about community service, because when I give a kid community service, I say, now look, the research tells us that the happiest people in the world are not the richest, they're not the smartest, they're not the strongest, they're not the wealthiest. So what is it? What the research tells us, that the happiest people in this world, and this is a general point for all of us,
are the giving people, the givingest. People that volunteer are found to be happier. I just read something the other day, 40% increase in longevity for people who are. I think the statistic was this, that they took some group of people and they looked at them and they said, elderly people, and they said those that volunteered twice a week or more frequently, they looked at them against a control group of people that didn't volunteer, and they found a 40% decrease in the death rate for the people that were volunteers, and so there's research there that tells us how important it is to do this. So when I give volunteer or community service, I ask these kids I say, look, find something that you really like. If you want to work at a church or a school or a hospital, find something that you really like to do, because I'm hoping that you're going to do these hours that I do, and then you're going to see the value of doing something good for somebody else, providing some real value, and you're going to say, you know what, I'm going to continue to do this. I don't care how many hours the judge gave me to do. This is something I'm going to keep doing, and the research tells us that if you start doing it, the younger you start, the happier you'll be from that. So those are things that we work to introduce. And then, of course, if a kid, and of course I tell them, you got to be in school every day. You've got to be completing all your assignments. I want to look at your school records when we come back. And then if a kid, responds appropriately and does all these things, then we're in a position where we might have a 3 to 6 month term of probation, and if they've adjusted well, we can close their case and warn them that if this happens again, you're not necessarily going to get the same treatment. We'll be looking at you could be looking at being taken out of your home and put in a residential placement. But some kids, they just need that wake-up call, and they need to understand that what they did was wrong, and then they will adjust appropriately. And sometimes we have to do something more.
What do you say to folks, Your Honor, who listen to your explanation of that type of treatment and say, you're giving these kids just a slap on the wrist?
Well, you have to think about what the research tells us in terms of long-term outcomes. And if we put everybody in placement on a first offense, then there is some research that says, long-term, you're not going to see a better result from these kids. I mean, there's a lot of research that actually says, for a number of kids, whatever the juvenile behavior they have, it tends to dry up, for lack of a better term, once they get into their early to mid-20s. They just, stop doing things that are A, illegal, or B, stupid. I mean, because they mature, they grow up. So to somebody who says, well, but I really think we should be focusing on punishment, I just say, the research doesn't really bear out that that's the best way, that provides us with the best long-term result. And if a kid corrects and he doesn't come back, and you don't have to put him in a second time, then you've interrupted his life and his education and everything else less, and B, you've spent less of the taxpayer's money dealing with it. Because every time I send a kid to a placement, I mean, the cost for that ranges between $150 to, at some places, even $400 or $500 a day. And I do believe we need to be thinking about everybody that's not serving life. Well, we need to be thinking about, are we giving them some services that we can expect them to be a better person when they come out or not? Because just locking them up somewhere for 20 years and not giving them any programming at all to become a better person, I mean, that can be a recipe for failure.
Absolutely. Too. Spend a couple of moments, if you would, talking about the mental health aspects of the young people that you deal with. Certainly, a young person could come into your court, take heed to what you say, do the community service hours, actually enjoy doing it. But if there are some underlying circumstances with anybody, with these kids that come into your court, if there's a mental health issue, sort of if there's violence in the home, if the kid is acting out as a result of their conditions, that's a whole nother kettle of fish, so to speak. How does the court address those types of issues?
You're so right about all of that. And when I mentioned that phrase about, well, what has been done to someone, that you're right that domestic violence in the home and inappropriate parenting and mental illness, those are huge issues down here. They're huge issues that drive substance abuse by kids who are looking to escape, and so those are huge issues. And I've got a case right now I'm dealing with where I'm working to. It's basically, it started as a delinquency case, and I see this kid's got mental health issues, and I've got to work to get a neglect case started because parents aren't really dealing with it appropriately, and so I want the young person to get mental health treatment, and there are a number of cases that we see where, mental health issues for kids, it's just seems to be trending to be more, a bigger problem.
Talk to us for just a moment, Your Honor, about the court's ability to intervene on these issues. When you see a kid who's obviously has some other issues that may lend themselves, or maybe issues having to do with a mental health issue or indeed a full-on mental illness, can you make a part of what you do, what you have them do, go to counseling and do therapy? Is that an option for the court?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And we can order psychological evaluations, we can order psychiatric evaluations, and we can direct that there to get mental health treatment. And so that is something that is quite prevalent. We do have a lot of young people with mental health issues, and it's understandable. And these kids are under a lot of stress. And I've been to presentations. I know from our prior discussion, I'm probably a little bit like you, James. I'm trying to learn as much as I can about everything that especially that can help me with my work here. So I've gone to presentations on trauma therapy and work to learn about that, because trauma for young people, it's really an issue, and of course we've seen it with the veterans, the post-traumatic stress syndrome that so many of our veterans are suffering from the extreme experiences that they have in combat, and for some of these kids, they are growing up in combat. And it has its toll, and we have to use all the tools we have available to work to address their issues.
All right. Now, I'm not asking you, Your Honor, not that you would, to throw any of your colleagues under the bus. However, some folks might say that the idea of taking into account, even with the mandate or the focus of a juvenile court for rehabilitation, that there's a bit of a conflict between the justice system and protecting the public and all of those other charges that it has, and looking out for the mental health aspects of these kids who come before you. Not all judges are as sensitive, I would dare say, to the idea of addressing the mental health issues and the underpinnings, the underlying dynamics of why kids are coming before them as you are. I've talked to a couple of judges in my time, and I think certainly the public perception is that, there are a fair amount of bench officers who are less understanding, tolerant, and are looking at it quite as globally. And again, not asking you to throw any of your colleagues under the bus, but how does your court take into account both public safety and the needs of these kids?
Well, first of all, obviously, public safety is a priority with me. I mean, I don't want to, put somebody out or release somebody from the courtroom if I think they're an active danger to our community. I'm just not going to do that. I mean, so that I recognize. As to the issue of, well, what about the fact that, some people might not want to, consider these things. They just say, well, whatever somebody has done, you don't really take into account, quote, mitigating circumstances. I mean, my philosophy is we're all members of the human race, all right? And some of us have done, some people may do some things that are wrong and that there should be some consequences for. But we don't expel people from the human race if they commit a crime, all right? Now, they may get life, all right, or in some states they may get the death penalty, but we don't, but short of that, we have to recognize that if somebody's going to go to prison or to a residential placement, I mean, if they're going to come back into society at some point, then we've got to be thinking about that as well as the fact that, they're going to be given some punishment. So you really have to be thinking about what is the solution for any individual that comes into court for whatever they've done. What's the solution? What forwards us? What advances us as a race in terms of what is going to be best for our community and that individual? Because I can just tell you, if we're going to say, well, that person is worthless because of what they've done, and we're not going to do anything except think about, making them pay, that, I mean, if somebody does life, well, that's, the ultimate penalty. But beyond that, if they're going to be back in our community, we got to be thinking about them as a person, too.
And indeed, some of the work that you've done, specifically the Cared Straight program that you're involved in, provides a pathway for individuals, some of whom who are in adult facilities, correctional facilities, in prisons, who are doing life, or at least and in some cases less than that, but certainly long stretches of time to actually give back to the community. Talk to us about that.
I got to tell you, James, this is a phenomenal program. What it is gentlemen that are serving long-term sentences started this counseling program. What we do is we bring in some young at-risk kids from our communities, and they go in, they spend a morning, they spend 3 or 4 hours with these gentlemen who are there. They are known as the Youth Deterrent Team, and the program is formally known as the Youth Deterrent Program. And that clip you saw is called Cared Straight, which Alan Sedgey, who's a filmmaker, a great young filmmaker, who put that clip together, and he came up with that name because he wanted to emphasize. If you hear a Youth Deterrent Program, how much does it really tell you? But when you hear Cared Straight, you think about Scared Straight. We've heard of that, where you take kids through jails and or prisons, and inmates try to intimidate them, and the research has shown that that's very ineffective. In fact, it's really counterproductive. And what these young, well, not so young, some of them in their 40s, 50s.
Yeah, these are, let's make no mistake, these guys are in prison. They're in the blue and orange jumpsuits in this video. They are these are not kids. These are, I mean, the youngest one may be in their 30s, and the oldest one is probably in his 60s or 70s.
Yeah.
And they're in there for a long time. This is the real life result of individuals who have done very bad things and who are in prison for it.
And have decided that they wanted to do what they could to work towards redemption, and have decided they wanted to help counsel young people to not go down the path that they have gone down. And I've attended a number of these sessions. They're very intense. They do some group discussion presentation, large group where, and they'll have 30, 35 kids at a time. They break down into small groups, and one of them will be talking to 4 or 5 kids. And what's really amazing, James, is that, and I've sat in these small groups, all right, and these young people, 15, 16 years old, who don't have a father in their life, or, and their mother may be challenged with, substance issues, and these young people will open up to these gentlemen who they've never met and talk to them about some of their deepest issues and challenges, and it's amazing. I mean, and they're very talented at. I mean, they've been doing this for years now. They know how to connect with young people. They have an instant credibility because they picked up their offenses. Most of them are from the Detroit area, so they come from the same neighborhoods that the kids that we bring in to see them come from. So they now, a lot of them have already spent 20 plus years in prison, but they are from those same neighborhoods, and they do a great job of connecting with these kids.
They really do, and we're going to put it up on our social media. It is, and I'm not just saying this to be nice to you, Your Honor, even though I think you're a great guy. It's a very short video of the most compelling, talking, communicating, connecting from this type of experience to people, not just kids, people in general who really need to hear it that I have ever seen. And I've been looking at this stuff for a long time. Talk to us about how this program even came about, and how do these guys who are these inmates, these prisoners, how did they get to the point of being able to, one, be so introspective and getting involved in this program? It seems like they must have had to have had some sort of training to get from where they started to where they are now.
Okay, so let me tell you a little bit to do that about the founder of the program, Darryl Woods. All right, and you'll see him in that clip. It's actually the total time it's right about 3 minutes actually, but the founder, Darryl Woods, and you'll see him in there because I think they all introduce themselves, and you're right. I mean, they all have a presence, and I was there the day that Alan filmed those little interviews, and I said to Alan, I kind of, we finished the last one, and I was like, wow, because each of them talked for 6 or 8 minutes or 10 or 12 minutes, whatever total, but Darryl had a vision to do this. Now, you got to remember, Darryl is one of these kids that, what I said earlier, didn't really know his dad. His mom had issues. He started dealing when he was 13 years old. 13 years old. I say to myself, or to you, James, and our listeners, but for the grace of God, that's me wearing that blue suit and with the orange on the shoulder. Basically, a drug dealer took him under his wing. If we can, that's an oxymoron or whatever the term is.
Sure.
But he was 18 or 19. He was involved in a drug deal. Somebody got killed. He didn't have a gun, but he was, involved in this drug deal. He got a sentence of life in prison. And he's been, in prison ever since. And so Darryl, I asked him, because he's the real founder of the program. Don't credit me with that, all right? Credit me with, if anything, discovering it. But Darryl just had a vision. He wanted to help young people, and he's just that kind of guy. He's just if you're ever in Detroit, I'm going to take you down there. We're gonna spend some time with Darryl and his whole group, because they are phenomenal people, and they've decided that despite their circumstances, which are, the last thing any of us would want is life in prison, they've decided to do something. And he started working. He contacted the governor. He kept pushing. He tells me it took him 10 years to get the green light on this project.
Wow.
Took him 10 years. So there's another lesson in perseverance.
Yeah.
One of the things I tell people in my book, we're not looking for, we shouldn't be focused on perfection in this life. We should be focused on persistence. And if we have persistence, we don't need perfection, because we're going to keep going, and we're going to do the things, and we're going to live the kind of life that we need to live. And that's what I like to say about my friend, and I love to call him my friend, Darryl Woods, because he's that kind of a guy. So he got the program approved. I contacted them. I attended a session. I've attended numerous sessions ever since. And basically, I set up a formal referral program for, I with my colleagues here, to send our young people over there to get this counseling. And I've had a number of our judges and referees have been over there. I had I've had referees said, they're in tears. I had one of our very experienced referees tell me, Judge, I went over and I was at that session, and it was one of the most compelling days of my career here, and I've been here, 20 years or whatever, and we work with these young people every day, but it's just that powerful. It really is.
It nearly brought me to tears. It is one of the most compelling, moving pieces that you will ever see, and I'm not exaggerating at all. But let's talk about what you do with respect to CCFL, Creating Champions for Life, and the book that you're working on. And connect for us. Obviously, there's got to be a connection between your experience as a judge, your experience with the program that we just talked about, Carrot Straight, your philosophy and approach toward what you do, and establishing Creating Champions for Life, and the book that you've written.
So there's a husband and wife who actually started it, and they recruited individuals like myself who had a progressive attitude about dealing with personal issues, about dealing with family issues, and actually, their story is quite a great story too. Tom and Bonnie Leota. Basically, Tom is a martial arts instructor, and his philosophy is how to raise kids without ever having to say no to them. And they have a whole parenting program that I've read their book. It's a beautiful program. They're all about, affirming, and he explains his strategy, but they wanted to not just promote and their concepts of good parenting, but they wanted to bring together a network of people that could help individuals and families with all kinds of issues. I mentioned nutrition. We have an expert who is a specialist in the nutrition field. We have a play expert, a creative play expert. And I've learned from her. Paige Olson, who her whole focus has been helping develop the self-esteem in young people. Everybody knows about sports, and hey, I love sports. I played hockey growing up, and got to the minor leagues, and you and I talked about playing tennis. I kind of switched the tongue up the skates for tennis. But there's other, not every kid is going to be into sports. And even if you are into sports, there's a lot of things that you can do with play that you don't necessarily get the creative aspect of really getting a kid's mind working by doing creative play. And she, I mean, let me give you an example of something she recommended to me. And I'll tell you something, James. When I heard this, I was like, well, I would have never thought of that. I mean, she talked about things like going to a thrift store and buying an appliance, a toaster or whatever, which of course you're going to pay $5 or $10 for, right? And then let your kid take it apart and figure out, what is it that makes it work? I mean, that's a very different kind of an exercise. And
that sounds like the kind of stuff that I used to get in trouble for when I was a kid. Because, when we grew up, it was not unusual for you to just kind of go at something in the house and, you figured going in you could put it back together, but, it never worked out that way.
Oh, that's beautiful.
My guest, Judge Frank Semansky, Superior Court Judge in the Juvenile Division in Wayne County. An excellent, excellent program and effort that he's made. He's been on the bench about 8 years. Before that, he was in private practice doing a bunch of different things. His book is called Identity Design. You can find more out about Judge Semansky on his personal website, judgefrank.com. Really just interesting guy, and as nice as he sounds during our conversation. His dad played for the Detroit Lions. Really cool, really interesting. That's it. You can find more. That's it for today's show. You can find more of my interview, and there is a bit more very interesting stuff about the academy that he's developed and that he's involved in online. Check out the podcast. It'll be posted in 48 hours or so. And as always, you can check out all the Mindset Show podcasts on iTunes, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, and YouTube, as well as Spreaker, our broadcast platform. And of course, if you like what we're doing here on Mindset, go to the website, mindsetshow.com. Buy something you were going to buy anyway. That's it for today's broadcast. Until next week, for Mindset, mental health news and information, I'm your host, James Curtis. Dare to see mental health differently, because understanding why we do what we do helps us all do better. See you next week.
Little Ernest Timothy Smithfield Sr.
James Hill L. I don't have an out date, so I'm scheduled to die here.
Michael 2X Tubbs.
Darryl Woods, sentenced to life without parole. We are the Youth Deterrent Program at the Detroit Reentry Center. We are here to transform the lives of our young people and give them a sense of identity and purpose.